Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, looking ahead to 2023, we're going to discuss economic matters and wonder if things getting even worse next year will actually help the government claim that it's actually getting better. As bizarre as this seems, this will certainly be their plan. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So when we left the single market and customs union, things got pretty bad for both the economy and domestic consumer power. The pandemic actually made some Brexit issues worse, like hospitality, for example, negatively impacted by Brexit. The industry struggles to get staff, struggles to import food and drink because it's that those imports are now less reliable and more expensive. In addition, because domestic food production has also suffered, they've had a harder time sourcing British produce as well. And because the labour shortages are felt everywhere, this makes it particularly bad for hospitality, where most businesses operate fairly slim profit margins. But COVID made it worse, because it means more staff absences due to, say, illness, for example. But because COVID had an adverse impact on the economy, it could be used to hide the impacts of Brexit. Ironically, having a rogue factor making the situation even worse allows the government to claim that, for example, leaving the EU had made things better or had no impact. Whereas if we'd seen the economic news developing without the pandemic or without Russia's invasion, then more people would have seen Brexit laid bare because there wouldn't have been anything to hide behind. Muddying the waters when there are multiple factors at play is a political trick as old as the hills. It allows you to downplay the factors you want to downplay and amplify the factors you want to emphasise according to your political needs. And the same game is about to be played next year. So earlier this year, some forecasts were published for inflation over the next few years in the G7. It had the UK experiencing the highest inflation of all G7 countries this year, next year and the year after. Note that inflation climbed even higher than this original forecast before the year was done, but the point is the UK having the worst of the inflation battle. But the rate of inflation is going to come down next year, and heavily, inevitably, without anyone doing anything. This is one reason why economists are aghast at various central banks raising interest rates. The central bank saying, well, we're raising interest rates to tackle inflation, and including the Bank of England. And the economists are going, no, inflation's coming down anyway. All the things that are driving inflation up, first of all, are not helped by higher interest rates. And second, they're dying out. So it does nothing to deal with inflation, and inflation is coming down anyway. So anyway, this forecast, made in summer, before Liz Truss introduced the moron premium, made it much worse, had the UK experiencing a little bit under 5% inflation in 2023. So coming right down. In reality, it's probably fair to say that it will now be higher next year than that. But Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is claiming that he's put in place policies that are going to reduce inflation next year. He says he'll get it back down to single digits. Well, that's not doing anything at all. It's going to go down to single digits if he did nothing. Without any policies designed to tackle inflation, inflation will naturally be a lower rate next year than it was this year. Something like, I think, 7% or so is the latest forecast. Note that this doesn't mean the cost of living eases. Actually, it gets worse. The cost of living will get worse next year than this year. And that is because people's incomes have been below the level of inflation this year. Your standard of living is effectively, what is your income? What is your spending power compared to what it was the year before? So if your increase in income is lower than the level of inflation, your standard of living goes down. And, and incomes are expected to be below the level of inflation again next year. So the standard of living will actually be even worse next year than it is this year. And this year it's so bad that we've had wide-ranging industrial action, including from some bodies who have never authorised strike action before. But the government will claim that things are getting better because the value of inflation will be lower. And people don't understand what inflation is. They don't get percentages, and they may accept the argument. Indeed, they often do. And I'll tell you now that's what the tactics are going to be. So here's how it's going to work. Hunt says he's going to get inflation back down to single digits, as if he should get a round of applause for that. Well, that could just mean 9%. Could actually mean 9.9%, I suppose. Big deal, say economists. If you do nothing, it should actually go down to about 7%, maybe even less. But the media won't publish those comments. So most voters will not be aware. They'll think, oh, inflation's like 11% at the moment. It'll stay 11% until the government do something. It's like, no. But anyway, then what'll happen is inflation will actually drop to 7%, maybe even 6%. There you are, says the Chancellor. My policies were so well executed. Not only did I do what I said and brought inflation down to single digits, but I brought it down to lower than I even anticipated. It's lower than when I took over, therefore I'm a great Chancellor. So the situation will be that the economy will actually be in worse shape than when Hunt and Sunak took over the government. The cost of goods and services will be higher as a proportion of average incomes. Our economy will be smaller in real terms. On all objective measures, the economy will be in worse shape. But the government will claim it's in better shape because inflation is lower. It's like someone breaking 3 of your ribs one day, and then when they see you again, they just break one and claim that they're helping you heal. And this will be what they try. Absolutely guarantee it. This is because governments do it all the time. And the reason it works is because the media let it work. The media should focus people's attention on spending power and the size of the economy compared to the baseline of not a few months ago, but when the government took over. What value has this government added? When Hunt is trying to proclaim his success next year, a media speaking truth to power will compare the cost of commonly required goods and services as a proportion of median income with how it was when the individuals took over and when the Tories took over. So they'll compare it with, say, October 2022 as well as May 2010. If they did that, the public would see that things have actually gotten worse. They should compare the size of the economy, because that'll be the next fiddle as well. Although that may take until 2024. They'll wait until we're out of recession. Who knows when that's going to end. But you would think before the election, unless, of course, there's a snap election. So they'll wait until we come out of recession. All economies come out of recession at some point without doing anything. The second the data shows growth, the government will hail their economic success. But a quarterly growth figure only compares GDP with the previous quarter. Compare it with when Sunak took over and it will still be negative. A little bit like someone saying they're going to make you money. You've got £1,000 in the bank. I'm going to invest it for you. Give me that £1,000. They take it off you. Oh, we lost most of it. There's only £100 left. And then a little later, the investment makes another £10. There you go. I told you your investment had worked. You've now got £110. You used to have 1,000. That's what it's like. The bottom line is the Tories will never grow the economy in real terms. They'll only be able to boast growth figures comparing it to a few months earlier with the knackered economy, never the one they inherited. But the general population doesn't know what inflation is. They don't know what growth is. They don't really know what percentages are. They think in terms of positive and negative in a very binary way, but they don't think about baselines. Which baseline are you comparing it to? The question is not how the government are going to play the economic narrative next year. That is childishly simple to predict. The question is, will it work? Now, that is less certain right now. It does generally work, this fiddle. It generally works. If inflation goes down, people are happy to think the government's done something good. If growth goes up, they're happy to think the government's done something good. But will they this time? Because how the Conservatives usually get this to work is by telling people that the economy is doing better. And those who are really struggling go, no, it's not. I'm struggling even worse. But they don't vote. Most voters, the middle classes, can still maintain a decent standard of living even during tough times. Because most of the people who vote, most of the people who determine the next government are those generally middle-aged towards elderly middle-class voters. And even when they're not doing as well as they should be, they're doing well enough. So they don't notice. Frog in a boiling pot. But the standard of living crisis has bitten so deeply that lots of core voters are also experiencing it directly. If the Tories try to claim that things are getting better, but middle-class voters are looking at their own circumstances and thinking, it's still getting worse for me, there is just a chance that the tactic will fall flat. The damage they've created with their unhinged policies have just created more suffering than they can manage politically, perhaps. They're usually careful to restrict the suffering to people who don't impact the results of elections because they don't engage with the political process. So they usually pick on the young or people in poverty who are switched off from politics. But the culmination of a frenzied austerity programme tied in with Brexit and then the unexpected pressures added on top has just meant a runaway economic disaster whose malign effects have spread much further than intended. We may actually see the con job fail next year. Not because the argument won't seem plausible, it will always work on a population that doesn't really understand maths, but because people will feel worse off. And voters who feel worse off are not generally inclined to vote for the party presiding over that drop in living standards. But there we are, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.